but some of those labels have been around since 70s. Yeah, the 1970s.
This is interesting. I've never seen it broken up.
This was Lauren. So Lauren prepared this for us as part of our process. So here we found ourselves at the beginning of this process and thinking about how do we want to work our way through the process and what are the parameters. So one of the parameters was resources. We don't have an enormous budget to do the re-scripting. That's why it's more of a re-scripting than it is anything more than that. But when we get up into the space, we can talk about changes that might be made. Another one of the things we decided early on was a few elements, one of them being contemporaneity. So one of the things we want to introduce in this re-scripting process is how to make it more relevant, how to make that space more relevant to people going through by bringing in contemporary issues, things to consider. In fact, one of those, there's the marketing department is actually going to launch a new project. I don't know if you know about it. It's the newsreel project. So basically there's going to be new sort of temporary labels, and the marketing department will keep an eye on news stories. And if something relates to something up in Becoming BC, they're going to put it on a nice template, print it off, and stick it in. For now, I think it's just going to be just a plexiglass holder, so that if you're looking at, say, something in the gold rush and there's something on Barrick Gold mining that's been in the news, you can look at the two of them and start to make connections. We also wanted to talk about in this process agency, so personal agency. Whose voices are going to tell their stories in terms of Becoming BC? Certainly the voice that we hear now is that of a white male European. So we want to start to bring in a lot more diversity, and that's why Tzu-I is here today, because that's a key aspect of what we're interested in doing in the space. We also didn't want to touch the stenography, so the exhibits. We're not going to touch any of the exhibits in any major way. I mean, you just can't achieve that level of design anymore. The only thing that will change is we're going to make the second floor of the hotel accessible for wheelchairs by installing a wheelchair lift. And we've been working on where in Old Town we're going to hide this thing. So I don't think it's been finalized yet. It's moved around a few times. But that will be happening in the next year. There's actually been capital funds set aside for it.
Is it safe to say that you're not touching the exhibits because of the resource issue? Is that a fair...
Not entirely the resource issue. They really are spectacularly done. But you're right, to replace any of that with anything new would take a lot of funds.
Up there that people don't go to.
Yes.
Because of flow problems.
And so let's point those out when we go up. And certainly there's the possibility within, like Old Town is a great example of looking at spaces within Old Town, like the shops. Are they the right shops? Do we want to introduce maybe diversity by changing a shop into, say, a photography studio? Where we could have photographs, archival photographs of all kinds of people in the space. These are the ideas that we're thinking about. I think the last thing I wanted to mention was to identify star artifacts. So there is material up there that was really just purchased at the time that the exhibitions were designed and installed. So they're antiques in their way, but they don't have good provenance. It tells the story at a basic level, but not at a really deep level. We have a lot of material in the collection that if we can identify where it makes sense to bring those materials in on display, we will do so. Anything you want to add to that, Sue?
Chris and I are strong advocates that Century Hall needs to change in some major ways.
So where
the
you can't
facade-
take, you can't, and we, like Leah said, we wouldn't want to take out the water wheel, say, or
Yeah, the facade
like that main,
are to stay.
but Century Hall's,
I think, yeah, the most major change you will likely see up there is going to be in Century Hall.
And does
That's where
Century,
everything's in glass cases.
yeah,
Yeah.
the decades.
and what century does Century Hall refer to? Like
This one.
Yeah, because the Old Town basically stops at around 1910, and then we don't have anything really other than Century Hall to cover off the next 100 years. So that space will continue to focus on that era,
But it stops at 1990.
yeah.
1990?
Yeah.
And it was meant to be temporary. They were
Yeah.
meant to switch it out, but with everyone's
It'll
work
be
schedule.
interesting
it's
because I
hard.
get flows of people who've just been there and I can give you feedback on
Yeah.
So maybe what we can
Okay.
do when we go up into the spaces, we'll move through the set pieces fairly quickly, but end up in Century Hall, because that really is the area that I would say is up for the most change, and also one that generates the most sort of debate
Yeah.
within the team that's working on this.
Can I just ask a question about living languages? Is it really leaving, and why?
Oh, I have no information.
I just don't understand. I hear.
It was meant to be
It was meant.
temporary.
I
It was.
know that.
It was meant to be
But-
3 years, and
I
it's
know
actually
that, but
past.
So
Yeah.
many people, and a lot of Indigenous people have asked me directly,
Yeah.
why is it leaving? Because it is so essentially important.
Is that getting out?
I have no idea, but I
We
have a
never
lot of
heard-
Indigenous friends, and
We never
this
heard
is what
it's
they're.
leaving.
We
And then
haven't
when
heard
we
that.
talk about modern,
I'm just
modern
passing on feedback.
Yeah.
when we talk about the Modern History Gallery renewal, when we think about the space in Century Hall, we actually thought about doing something that echoes what's done was the Living Languages exhibit, and just have a counterpart about the multicultural languages in Century in the current space of Century Hall. So in any of our planning, none of it is without the living languages.
We're assuming
It
it's
is
there.
So far.
Yeah, so we've spent our first meeting was in June. We had 3 interpretive planning sessions. The first one was in June, and never in all of those interpretive planning sessions have we been directed to think about the space where our living languages is.
That's interesting, because every time I've had concerns about flow, having temporary stations and people coming through, directing people even to Old Town or to the bathroom, and I've brought these forward, I've been told, well, the living language is temporary,
Yeah.
so the flow will be easy after. But if it's not going to be temporary,
Needs to be
then
dealt
the
with.
flow should be looked at.
And I want to reassure you that these are all questions
I'm
that
sure
have been
you're aware of them.
and are
Yeah.
being discussed and considered. Yeah.
And just as one bit of feedback on the popularity of living languages, I go in and if I do the tour, if there's if there are people there, then we go through the modern history guide. I never try and get into Century Hall because I've been talking at people for too long by then.
Yeah.
But if I go through the gallery and there is virtually nobody in the Becoming BC gallery,
Yeah.
living languages has always got people in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it seems to be a very popular place.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah, I
nobody
think-
anywhere
yes,
else.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
actually-
Yeah.
I think it is also because it's a place to sit. And I think kids love to smash those things as they're going out.
They're gonna push
Listen
you.
to them.
And do we know that everybody gets lost in the museum,
So let's-
especially on the 3rd floor?
Let's
Yeah,
move
I
into
think
this,
that's
and,
good.
and we can talk about that. So, I've put out on the table here some of the past studies that have been done on redoing and Becoming BC. At the very end, you see the Ring of Time.
Yeah.
That's from Jean Angers, and he was the designer of the galleries as we know them now. Now, he designed the galleries to start at Century Hall so that you went back in time. And a lot of people now, because of our living languages, start at the other end and work forward in time. One of the things that we're having to keep in mind as we're working on the spaces is, and what we agreed to do from very early on, was to look at each space, and we divided it into 4, and I'll get to that. But to look at each space first thematically and then chronology. So we're going to loosen up on the chronology and not focus as much on that as we are going to focus on what's the story that we want to tell in this space. Because, like it or not, people are always going to go either way. So
Yeah.
we want it to work no matter what direction you're going through the space.
So the context for this discussion today is about the changes that are forthcoming.
No, it's really, I just want to bring you up to speed on what we've done already, and then
Okay.
how much is left to go.
Okay.
Yeah, and then get your feedback, because there's still opportunity to feed into the process. So we divided the space. I tried to print off a map this morning and I was defeated by the photocopier. So we've divided the galleries into 4 galleries, which we call colonialism. So that's the exploration gallery and the fur trade galleries.
So the ship and
The ship, and then the exploration, the fur trade. The next is industry. So that would be the farming and the mine and the lumber mill. The third one is Old Town, so pretty much as we think of it now, and the 4th one is Century Hall. So those are we have a team that works in each space, and each team was assigned the responsibility of coming up with a key message, and so we'll look at what the teams came up with, and then sub-themes, along with perhaps what are the star artifacts that might be introduced, and also something around emotion. What kind of emotions do we want people to have as they're moving through these spaces? So we started off doing a background of what's been done today. So we had Jean-André's original design, so we understood where he was coming from.
And how old is that? Excuse me, sorry.
This would be from the 80s.
It's 1985 published.
85. Okay.
And it's very interesting because at the end it goes, and the next phase will be this.
yeah.
And then the next phase didn't happen because that's where the temporary exhibition space is, and that's not going to go away. So that's our challenge in natural history galleries. How do we tell a natural history story of British Columbia when really the natural history gallery is the coast? So that's going to be one of our challenges.
Right.
In the 90s, we hired a consultant, David Jensen, to start the process of looking at how we could rescript the space. Pretty much got shelved as far as I know. Then when Tim Willis was here, we did a huge study. This was an entire revisioning of the space, like looking at the stenography, building in a mezzanine, just like a complete redo of the space.
Both Becoming BC and the First Peoples Gallery.
Okay, so a wonderful job, a lot of research, helpful. We do not have the resources to make this a reality. So what we're doing now, so that something actually happens, so we stop having these false starts, is we're going to start small. And we're starting with rescripting. So like we've already talked about, is really the most changes you're going to see is around the text, introducing some new artifacts, introducing new voices. And so that's that history. We also had a history of mostly the learning department doing work in the space. So the learning department has done these interventions. You guys have you ever participated or you know about the interventions? Do you want to talk about the interventions?
It's been working with visitors of all ages to spend time up in the gallery and really look at it and interrogate it, and then in a thoughtful way, but also a rough way, like a prototype way, for them to suggest changes of inserting other narratives or other ways of thinking within the gallery. So it's a good exercise for visitors to be able to have a voice temporarily within the space, but then also good feedback for us in terms of what visitors are seeing that's missing or that's problematic, and what they would like to see in the space. So they're called interventions because they're intervening within the established narrative within the gallery and making suggestions. And then sometimes, over the last 4 years in particular with teachers at UVic, they've actually spent the night creating interventions and prototyping it, and then having visitors see their ideas the next morning. So there are different ways that we've approached that, but it's all about looking, interrogating the galleries, and then making suggestions.
And Tzu-I, you ran an intervention. So, do you want to speak to this? So this was with
The
the Punjabi
Punjab.
community, and one of Tzu-I's major focus is called the Punjabi Canadian Legacy Project. So, do you want to just say for this what you did in this particular intervention?
We didn't do the planning. Basically, we consulted with our advisory group that are all community leaders and members of the group. of the communities and basically say we do have a gap in the museum collections and gallery in terms of addressing this particular group that we don't think that they are defined only by their ethnicity or cultural origins. At the same time, this is a group that was discriminated against as a whole before 1947. So we do want to share some of their collective experiences, and then there are some legacies of that history still within the communities that we wish to address. So we consulted with the advisory committee. They came up with the name, The Log That Built BC, and they suggested ways to actually, for previously marginalized groups to actually come in and take over the space and insert their own stories by themselves with their own voices. So at the event, the learning team did a really great job of facilitating it in terms of providing the cameras that print out photos right away, and people can insert where they think their stories are. And
so, for example, we papered over one of the display cases in Century Hall, and then people could. It was actually Tzu-I's daughter and my kid with cameras, little cameras, and then they were able to. The visitors were able to insert their own stories within Century Hall and one of the display cases.
And then we have advisors stationed in different parts of the industry gallery and just discuss what needs to be done with this provincial institution in terms of breaking that cultural barrier and make it a space for the general public. And this takeover is not just for that one particular community, but it's mainly for opening up the space.
So we're starting to get focus groups who are feeding into this process. And then we do something which we do for all large exhibition projects now in interpretive planning, is something called a design jam. And a design jam is our opportunity to bring in stakeholders and staff and to explore ideas around proposed projects, in this case rescripting Becoming BC, but doing it in a fun and really creative way. So it's actually accompanying two people who come over from Vancouver, and we play games, we go up in the space. We had a competition with this particular design jam where you would win a prize. So the 4 teams had already been identified, and it got very competitive. And I would say certain people were extremely competitive, but are also small and can be lifted up and away from the table so that people can get in. It was
They
great.
bullied me, that's what she said.
So we got some really interesting information out of that process. In the exploration galleries, we talked about the outcomes were a focus on languages and diverse voices, animals of the fur trade contact history, so really needing to put that in there. In the fur trade, more sensory, sounds and touch, replace the set piece with one. So we were asked, everyone got to do like their super high risk one bullet point, and most often related to like replace the maritime gallery. I think that was high up on the list for a lot of people. Douglas treaties, wanting to feature the Douglas treaties in the fur trade area. Gold rush, women in agriculture. So where are the women really in Becoming BC? In Old Town, the train station, is there an opportunity to put virtual reality in there? Can we put in, can we introduce stories of immigration? And then adding the First Nations story, how are we going to do that in Old Town, where they were literally marginalized? So we got some great information from that process. We wanted to identify our audience. That's a really important part of interpretive planning, is who are we doing this for? Who is our audience? So we looked at the demographics, because the marketing department keeps a really good review of our demographics, and realized that our main audience are BC families that are well off, educated, and white. So as much as we want to diversify our audiences, we'll do that through the stories that we're introducing and what through the learning department does and marketing. But the bulk of the audience that's going to see our changes are going to be that demographic.